The September morning felt different as Amira Hassan stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her navy blue hijab. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned it in place, making sure every hair was neatly tucked away. Today marked her first day as a freshman at Riverside High School, and the knot in her stomach grew tighter with each passing minute. "Amira, breakfast is ready." Her mother's voice called from downstairs. The familiar smell of scrambled eggs and toast wafted up to her room. At the breakfast table, Amira's younger sister, Sophia, watched her with curious eyes. "Are you scared?" she asked, munching on her toast. Before Amira could answer, her father lowered his newspaper and smiled warmly. "Your sister has nothing to be scared of," he said, his voice filled with pride. "She was top of her class in middle school, and she'll do just as well in high school." Amira forced a smile, but her father's words only added to the pressure she felt. Being the first child of immigrant parents meant carrying their dreams on her shoulders. Her mother and father had left everything behind in Pakistan to give their children a better life in America. Every achievement of Amira's was a testament to their sacrifice. The drive to school was quiet. As her father's car approached Riverside High, Amira's heart began to race. The building looked enormous compared to her middle school, its red brick walls stretching wide across perfectly manicured lawns. Groups of students hung around the entrance, laughing and catching up after summer break. "Remember, Beta," her father said as she stepped out of the car, "you're just as good as anyone else here. Keep your head high." Amira nodded, clutching her backpack tightly. As she walked toward the main entrance, she could feel eyes turning toward her. The comfortable confidence she had felt in her Islamic school last year began to fade. Here, she was different. Her hijab made her stand out in a sea of students dressed in the latest fashion trends. The whispers started almost immediately. "Look at the new girl," someone said, not bothering to lower their voice. A group of girls standing by the lockers giggled as she passed. Finding her locker took longer than expected. By the time Amira located number 247, the hallway was clearing out. She fumbled with the combination lock, her fingers refusing to cooperate. After 3 attempts, it finally clicked open. "Need some help?" a friendly voice asked. Amira turned to see a girl with curly black hair and glasses smiling at her. "I'm Maria. My locker's right next to yours." "I'm Amira," she replied, relieved to see a friendly face. "It's my first day." "Mine too." "Well, technically everyone's first day, but you know what I mean," Maria laughed. "What's your first class?" Amira checked her schedule. "Advanced biology with Mr. Peterson." "No way, me too." Maria's enthusiasm was contagious. "Want to walk together?" As they made their way to class, Amira felt some of her anxiety melt away, but the moment of peace was short-lived. While passing through the science wing, a tall boy deliberately bumped into her shoulder, causing her books to scatter across the floor. "Oops, sorry," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. His friend snickered behind him. Maria immediately bent down to help Amira gather her things. "Don't mind Brad," she whispered. "He thinks being captain of the junior varsity football team makes him king of the school." Amira remained silent as she collected her books, her father's words echoing in her mind. "Keep your head high." She stood up straight, adjusted her hijab, and walked into the classroom with as much dignity as she could muster. Mr. Peterson's classroom was already full when they entered. The only empty seats were at the front, right under the teacher's nose. As Amira settled into her chair, she could hear more whispers behind her. But when Mr. Peterson started talking about the year's curriculum, something changed in Amira. Science had always been her favorite subject, and as the teacher described the advanced projects they would be working on, her earlier fear began to transform into determination. She might be different, she might face challenges, but in this classroom, only her intelligence and hard work would matter. By the end of first period, Amira had answered 3 of Mr. Peterson's questions correctly, earning approving nods from the teacher and surprised looks from her classmates. It was a small victory, but an important one. This was just the beginning of her journey at Riverside High, and despite the morning's difficulties, Amira was ready to prove herself, not just to her parents or her peers, but to herself. 2 weeks into the school year, Amira's initial optimism began to fade. The bullying had become more organized and cruel. Each morning, she dreaded opening her locker, never knowing what she might find inside. That Wednesday started like any other day. Amira walked through the main hallway, keeping her eyes focused on the floor tiles. She had learned that making eye contact often invited trouble. As she approached her locker, she noticed a small crowd gathering nearby, trying to look casual but clearly waiting for something. When she opened her locker door, dozens of paper airplanes flew out, scattering across the floor. Each one had been decorated with crude drawings of her in her hijab. The surrounding students burst into laughter, phones raised to capture her reaction. Maria, who had become Amira's closest friend, immediately started picking up the papers. "Don't give them the satisfaction," she whispered, but Amira could see tears forming in her friend's eyes. Brad, the football player who had bumped into her on the first day, leaned against a nearby locker. "What's wrong? Can't take a joke?" he called out, encouraging more laughter from his followers. Just then, Mrs. Rodriguez, the world history teacher, turned the corner. The crowd quickly dispersed, but not before she saw the papers scattered across the floor. She picked one up, her expression darkening as she examined it. Maria, come with me," she said firmly. In her office, Mrs. Rodriguez asked Amira to explain what had been happening. At first, Amira hesitated, not wanting to make things worse. "It's not just today," Maria burst out, unable to contain herself. "They've been leaving notes calling her a terrorist. They knock her books down in the hallway. Someone even tried to pull off her hijab last week." Mrs. Rodriguez's face showed shock and anger. "Why didn't you report this earlier?" Amira stared at her hands. "I didn't want to cause problems. My parents always taught me to be strong, to prove myself through my actions." "Being strong doesn't mean suffering in silence," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. "This is harassment, and it stops today." That afternoon, Principal Stevens called an emergency assembly. Without naming names, he addressed the recent incidents of bullying and announced a zero-tolerance policy for any form of religious or cultural discrimination. But the assembly had an unexpected effect on Amira. As she sat listening to the principal, something inside her shifted. She was tired of being a victim, tired of hiding. During lunch break, she asked Mrs. Rodriguez for permission to speak at the next school assembly. "Are you sure?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, studying Amira's face carefully. "Yes," Amira replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "If they're going to talk about me, they should at least know who I really am." The next few days were busy. Amira spent hours after school working on her speech, with Maria and Mrs. Rodriguez helping her refine her words. Even in class, she found herself speaking up more, especially in advanced biology where she continued to excel. Brad and his friends still made comments, but something had changed. Their words seemed to have less power over her now. She noticed that some students who used to join in the laughter now looked uncomfortable when the bullying started. One afternoon, as Amira was leaving the library, she overheard a conversation that stopped her in her tracks. "Did you know she has the highest grade in advanced bio?" one girl whispered to another. "Jenny tried to copy her lab report last week, but even Mr. Peterson says Amira's work is college level. I heard she's helping Maria's little sister with math tutoring for free," the other girl responded. "Maybe we've been wrong about her." Amira walked home that day with her head held higher. The bullying hadn't stopped completely, but she was no longer the same scared girl who had started school a few weeks ago. She was finding her voice, and soon, everyone would hear it. That evening, as she practiced her speech in front of her family, her little sister, Sofia, watched with wide eyes. "You're so brave," she said afterward. Their father wiped tears from his eyes. "Beta, you make us proud not just with your grades now, but with your courage." Amira smiled, touching her hijab gently. Tomorrow would be challenging, but she was ready. The scared freshman was transforming into someone stronger, someone who could face her bullies not with fear, but with dignity and wisdom. The real test was yet to come, but for the first time, Amira felt truly prepared to face it. The day of Amira's speech arrived with a tension that could be felt throughout Riverside High. The assembly hall buzzed with whispers as students filed in, many curious about what the quiet Muslim girl in the hijab would say. Standing behind the stage curtain, Amira's hands trembled as she held her note cards. Mrs. Rodriguez stood beside her, offering quiet encouragement. "Remember, Amira, you've earned this moment. Just speak from your heart." Principal Stevens introduced her with a brief statement about diversity and respect. As Amira walked to the podium, she could hear Brad and his friends snickering in the third row. but something else caught her attention. Maria and several other students were wearing headscarves in different colors, showing their solidarity. Taking a deep breath, Amira began her speech. "Many of you know me as the girl in the hijab," she started, her voice initially shaky but growing stronger. "Some of you have called me worse things. Today, I want you to know who I really am." She told them about her parents' journey to America, their dreams for their children, and their belief in education. She explained how her hijab was not a symbol of oppression, but a personal choice that made her feel empowered and connected to her faith. "When you pulled off my hijab last month," she said, looking directly at a girl who had done so, "you didn't just take a piece of cloth. You tried to strip away my dignity. But my dignity doesn't come from what I wear or what you think of me. It comes from who I am." The assembly hall had grown completely silent. Even Brad wasn't laughing anymore. "I'm the same person who loves science and dreams of becoming a doctor," Amira continued. "I'm the same person who helps with math tutoring and enjoys watching basketball. My hijab doesn't change any of that. It's just one part of who I am." As she spoke, Amira noticed something remarkable. Students who had previously avoided eye contact were now watching her intently. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed moved, and a few even had tears in their eyes. Then came the moment that would change everything. During the question and answer session, Brad stood up. Everyone tensed, expecting another cruel joke, but his face was serious. I never thought about it that way," he said, his voice unusually quiet. "I'm sorry for being such a jerk. I guess I was just afraid of what I didn't understand." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, other students began to stand up, sharing their own stories of feeling different or excluded. One girl spoke about being teased for her accent, another about being mocked for her weight. As the assembly ended, something had shifted in the school's atmosphere. Students who had never spoken to Amira before came up to thank her. A group of girls asked if she would be willing to teach them about her culture. Later that day, in advanced biology, Mr. Peterson announced the first major project of the year, a group assignment. When he asked students to choose their partners, something unexpected happened. Several people, including some who had previously bullied her, asked to work with Amira. Walking home that afternoon, Amira felt lighter than she had in weeks. Her father, who had taken time off work to attend the assembly, woke beside her with proud tears in his eyes. "You know, Bega," he said, "when we came to this country, we hoped you would be successful. But today, you showed us something more important than success. You showed courage and wisdom beyond your years." That evening, as Amira sat at her desk working on homework, she received a text from an unknown number. It was from Jenny, one of Brad's friends who had been part of the bullying. "Can we talk tomorrow? I'd like to apologize properly." Amira smiled as she typed her response. "Of course. Maybe we can have lunch together." As she got ready for bed that night, Amira caught her reflection in the mirror. The girl looking back at her was different from the one who had started school a few weeks ago. She stood taller, more confident. The breaking point that her bullies had tried to create had instead become her breakthrough. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Amira was ready for them. She had found her voice, and more importantly, she had helped others find theirs too. The journey was far from over, but the hardest part, taking that first stand, was behind her. In the weeks following her speech, Amira noticed significant changes at Riverside High. The once hostile hallways became places of friendly greetings, and her locker, previously a source of dread, now often held encouraging notes from new friends. One morning, as Amira organized her books, Jenny approached her nervously. "I have an idea," she said, fidgeting with her bracelet. "What if we started a cultural awareness club, to help people understand different backgrounds and traditions?" Amira looked at Jenny with surprise. This was the same girl who had once joined in mocking her. "That's actually a great idea," she replied, smiling. "But we'll need a faculty advisor." "I believe I can help with that," Mrs. Rodriguez said, approaching them. She had overheard their conversation. "In fact, I've been thinking about something similar myself." Within days, posters announcing the first meeting of the Cultural Bridge Club decorated the school hallways. Amira and Jenny worked together to plan activities and discussions, with Mrs. Rodriguez guiding them. The day of the first meeting arrived, and Amira felt nervous as she set up chairs in the classroom. "What if nobody comes?" she whispered to Maria, who was helping her arrange snacks. Her worry proved unnecessary. Students began trickling in, first a few, then more, until the room was packed. Even Brad showed up, though he sat quietly in the back. "Welcome, everyone," Amira began, her confidence growing as she spoke. "Today, we're starting something special. This isn't just a club. It's a bridge between our different worlds." The meeting turned into something more meaningful than anyone expected. Students began sharing stories about their families, traditions, and experiences. A Korean student talked about feeling ashamed of his lunch until he learned to be proud of his heritage. A Hispanic girl described how her grandmother's stories connected her to her roots. As the meeting progressed, Rad raised his hand. The room grew quiet. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice unusually soft. "Maybe for our next meeting, I could bring my grandmother. She's a Holocaust survivor, and her story, well, it's about prejudice and survival too." Amira nodded encouragingly. "That would be perfect, Brad. This is exactly what the club is about, learning from each other's experiences." After the meeting, Mrs. Rodriguez pulled Amira aside. "You've started something remarkable here," she said. "But I'm even more impressed by your advanced biology performance. Mr. Peterson told me you're still maintaining the highest grade in class." Amira blushed at the praise. Her love for science hadn't diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger. She was now leading study groups, helping other students understand complex concepts. That evening at dinner, Amira shared the day's events with her family. Her little sister Sophia listened with wide eyes. "Can I come to the next meeting?" she asked eagerly. "I want to tell them about Eid." Their parents exchanged proud glances. "You see, Amira," her father said, "sometimes the hardest challenges bring the most beautiful changes." Later that night, while working on her biology homework, Amira received a group text from Jenny. "Cultural Bridge Club is trending on the school's social media. People from other schools are asking how to start their own." Amira smiled as responses flooded in. The club members were already planning future events: a cultural food festival, a traditional clothing day, and a series of speakers from different backgrounds. As she prepared for bed, Amira thought about how much had changed. The girl who had once been bullied for her hijab was now helping to build bridges between different communities. Her grades remained excellent, but she had learned something more valuable than academic success: the power of turning pain into purpose. Looking at her reflection, Amira adjusted her hijab with pride. On her desk lay her biology textbook, next to the planning folder for the Cultural Bridge Club. These two parts of her life no longer felt in conflict. They were both essential pieces of who she was becoming. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Amira felt ready for them. She had found not just her voice, but her mission. The same strength that helped her excel in her studies was now helping her create positive change in her school community. As she drifted off to sleep, Amira thought about the upcoming club meetings, her biology projects, and all the possibilities ahead. The future seemed bright with promise, not just for her, but for everyone whose lives she was touching along the way. As winter approached, Amira's junior year was proving to be transformative. The Cultural Bridge Club had grown to become one of Riverside High's most popular organizations, but Amira's academic achievements were drawing even more attention. One cold December morning, Mr. Peterson made an announcement that caused the advanced biology class to fall silent. "The state science competition is coming up in March," he said, scanning the room. "Each school can send only one student representative. Based on consistent performance, I'm nominating Amira Hassan." The class erupted in applause. Even those who had once mocked her now looked at her with respect. Brad, who sat 2 rows behind her, gave her a thumbs up. During lunch break, Maria couldn't contain her excitement. "Do you know how big this is?" she exclaimed. "No freshman has ever represented Riverside at the state level." Amira felt the weight of the opportunity, but also the pressure. That evening, she shared the news with her family over dinner. Her father beamed with pride, while her mother wiped happy tears from her eyes. "Beta," her father said, "when we came to this country, this was our dream, that you would have opportunities like this, but you've exceeded our expectations." The next few weeks became a whirlwind of preparation. Amira spent hours in the lab after school, working on her research project about sustainable energy solutions. Mr. Peterson mentored her, often staying late to help refine her experiments. One evening, as she was gathering her materials to leave, Jenny walked into the lab. "Need any help?" she asked. "I'm not great at science, but I can take notes or something." Soon, a small group of students began staying after school to help Amira. They created a study schedule, with different people helping on different days. The same students who had once isolated her were now part of her support system. During this time, Amira didn't neglect the Cultural Bridge Club. In fact, she found ways to incorporate her scientific interests into the club's activities. She organized a session about famous scientists from different cultures, highlighting contributions that weren't typically covered in textbooks. One day, Principal Stevens called Amira to his office. She found him sitting with Mrs. Rodriguez and Mr. Peterson. "Amira," the principal began, "your achievements this year have been remarkable. Not just academically, but in bringing positive change to our school community. The school board has noticed." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled warmly. "They want to feature your story in the district newsletter. You're becoming a role model, Amira." Mr. Peterson added, "And your current grade point average puts you at the top of your class. If you maintain this performance, you're on track to be valedictorian." Amira felt overwhelmed by their words. Just a few months ago, she had been the target of bullying. Now, she was being recognized as a leader. Walking home that day, she passed Brad practicing football. He waved her over. "Hey," he said, looking somewhat embarrassed, "some of us are having trouble with the biology midterm coming up. Would you consider tutoring us?" Amira agreed without hesitation. The next week, she found herself leading study sessions in the library, explaining complex concepts to the very people who had once made her school life difficult. That evening, as she worked on her science competition project, Amira received an email that made her heart skip a beat. It was from a prestigious summer science program at Harvard University, expressing interest in her application. She ran downstairs to share the news with her family. Her little sister Safia hugged her tightly. "You're going to be the best doctor ever," she declared. One step at a time, Amira laughed, but her heart swelled with possibility. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, Amira looked at the calendar where she'd marked the date of the state science competition. Next to it, she'd written her goals. Top of class, science competition, summer program. But what made her most proud wasn't listed on that calendar. It was the change she saw in her school, the bridges being built between different groups, and the way her passion for science was inspiring others. As she adjusted her hijab for bed, Amira smiled at her reflection. The girl who had started the year afraid of standing out was now standing out for all the right reasons. Her academic excellence was opening doors, but it was her character that was changing lives, including her own. The day of the state science competition arrived with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Amira stood in front of her presentation board at the State Convention Center, adjusting her emerald green hijab. The one her mother said brought out the determination in her eyes. Her project, Sustainable Energy Solutions for Urban Communities, had already impressed the first round of judges. Now she waited for the final presentation that would determine the winner. Mr. Peterson stood nearby, beaming with pride as other teachers stopped to examine his students' work. "You won't believe who's here," Maria whispered, rushing up to Amira. "Dr. Sarah Chen from Stanford University. She's one of the competition judges, and she's famous for her work in renewable energy." Amira's heart raced. She had read all of Dr. Chen's published papers while researching her project. Before she could respond, an announcement echoed through the hall. "Final presentations begin in 5 minutes. Contestants, please take your positions." To her surprise, Amira noticed familiar faces in the audience. Brad, Jenny, and several other students from Riverside High had made the 2-hour drive to support her. Even more touching was the sight of her entire family, including little Safia holding a handmade "Go Amira" sign. As Amira began her presentation, her initial nervousness melted away. She explained her research with confidence, describing how her project could help low-income communities access sustainable energy. The judges listened intently, especially Dr. Chen, who nodded approvingly at several points. During the question and answer session, Dr. Chen raised her hand. "Your research shows impressive depth," she said. "What inspired you to focus on helping underprivileged communities?" Amira took a deep breath. "My parents taught me that education isn't just about personal success," she replied. "It's about using our knowledge to help others. Growing up in an immigrant family, I saw how limited resources can affect communities. I want my science to make a difference. After all presentations were complete, the contestants gathered for the awards ceremony. Amira sat between Mr. Peterson and her parents, trying to calm her racing heart. Third place goes to, the announcer began. It wasn't Amira. Second place. Another name was called. And the first place winner of this year's state science competition is, the room fell silent, Amira Hassan from Riverside High School. The convention center erupted in applause. Sophia's excited screams could be heard above the crowd. As Amira walked to the stage, she saw Brad and her other classmates giving her a standing ovation. Dr. Chen presented her with the trophy and whispered, "Remarkable work, Ms. Hassan. Stanford University would be lucky to have a student like you." During the celebration afterward, reporters from local newspapers wanted to interview her. One asked how it felt to be the first student from Riverside High to win the state competition. "It's not just my victory," Amira responded. "It belongs to everyone who supported me, my teachers, my family, my friends. Even those who once doubted me pushed me to work harder." The reporter looked curious. "What do you mean by that?" Amira smiled. "Let's just say that sometimes our biggest challenges become our greatest motivations." On the drive back to Riverside, Amira sat quietly, holding her trophy and reading congratulatory messages on her phone. One message from Jenny stood out. "You didn't just win a science competition today. You showed everyone that nothing is impossible when you believe in yourself." At school the next day, Principal Stevens called an assembly to recognize Amira's achievement. As she stood on stage, looking at her fellow students, she remembered her first assembly months ago, when she had stood up against bullying. Now, she was standing as a champion. That afternoon in advanced biology, Mr. Peterson handed out a pop quiz. As Amira focused on the questions, she overheard two students whispering behind her. "I want to be just like her," one said. "The Hijab girl?" the other asked. "No, the girl who never gave up, who proved everyone wrong, who's going to change the world." Amira smiled to herself as she continued her quiz. The trophy was wonderful, but this, changing people's perceptions, inspiring others to dream bigger, this was the real victory. That evening, as she added her trophy to the family's display cabinet, her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "You know, Beta," he said softly, "some people climb mountains to prove their strength. You've moved them." Spring arrived at Riverside High with exciting news. The school's academic rankings were posted, and Amira Hassan had maintained her position at the top of her class. Her perfect GPA, combined with her state science competition victory, had caught the attention of several prestigious universities. One morning, Mrs. Rodriguez called Amira into her office. "The college acceptance letters have started arriving," she said, gesturing to a stack of envelopes on her desk. "Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, they all want you, Amira." Tears welled up in Amira's eyes as she read through the letters. Each one offered not just admission, but significant scholarships. Her dream of becoming a doctor suddenly felt more real than ever. During lunch break, Maria found Amira sitting quietly in the library. "Why aren't you celebrating?" she asked, noticing her friend's thoughtful expression. "I was just thinking about everything that's happened," Amira replied. "Remember when some students wouldn't even sit next to me in class? Now they're asking me to help them with college applications." As if on cue, Brad appeared at their table. "Hey, Amira," he said, looking nervous. "I got into State University, and it's all thanks to your tutoring. My dad wants to know if you'd help my younger sister too. She's starting here next year." Amira smiled warmly. "Of course I will. Actually, that gives me an idea." The next day, Amira proposed a new initiative to Principal Stevens, a peer mentoring program where seniors would help incoming freshmen adjust to high school, especially those from different cultural backgrounds. The principal approved it immediately. "You're not just leaving a legacy of academic excellence," he told her. "You're creating a support system that will help students for years to come." News of Amira's college acceptances spread quickly through the school. During a Cultural Bridge Club meeting, Jenny made an announcement that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "Next year, we're renaming the club," she said. "It will be called the Hassan Bridge Program in honor of Amira, because she taught us that building bridges is more important than building walls." The club members erupted in applause. Even Mrs. Rodriguez wiped away tears. At home that evening, Amira found her little sister Safia wearing one of her old hijabs and pretending to study science books. "What are you doing?" Amira asked, amused. "Practicing," Safia replied seriously. "I want to be just like you when I start high school next year." Their parents watched from the doorway, their eyes filled with pride. "Your sister has set quite an example," their mother said to Sophia. "But remember, Beta, the greatest success is not in the achievements, but in how you help others achieve their dreams too." As senior year drew to a close, Amira made her decision. She would attend Stanford University, inspired by Dr. Chen's mentorship at the science competition, but before leaving for college, she had one more mission to complete. She organized a summer science camp for middle school girls, particularly those from immigrant families. The response was overwhelming. The same students who had once mocked her hijab now volunteered to help with the program. One afternoon, while setting up for the science camp, Amira overheard two young participants talking. "Did you know she was bullied when she started high school?" One girl whispered. "Really? But everyone loves her now," the other responded. "That's because she didn't let the bullies win. My mom says she showed everyone that what's inside your head is more important than what's on it." Amira smiled to herself, remembering her father's words from her first day of high school. "Keep your head high." She had done more than that. She had lifted others up with her. That evening, as she reviewed her Stanford acceptance letter again, Amira felt a deep sense of peace. Her journey at Riverside High had been more than just academic success. She had transformed from a scared freshman in a hijab to a leader who helped change the school's culture. Looking at her reflection in the window, Amira saw both who she had been and who she had become. A young woman who had turned adversity into opportunity, fear into strength, and prejudice into understanding. Her valedictorian speech was still to come, but she already knew its most important message. Sometimes the hardest path leads to the most beautiful destination. Graduation day arrived at Riverside High with a clear blue sky and gentle breeze. The school grounds were filled with proud families, colorful flowers, and the excited chatter of seniors in their caps and gowns. Amira stood before her mirror at home, carefully arranging her white hijab under her graduation cap. "Are you nervous about the speech?" Safia asked, watching her sister prepare. "A little," Amira admitted, "but it's a good kind of nervous." Their father appeared in the doorway, his eyes glistening. "Your mother and I have a surprise for you," he said, holding out a small box. Inside was a beautiful silver pendant with Arabic calligraphy. "It says, 'Strength and Wisdom,'" he explained. "Just like you've shown throughout these years." At the ceremony, the football field was packed with families and friends. As valedictorian, Amira sat on stage with the school administrators. Looking out at the crowd, she saw faces that told the story of her journey. Maria, her first friend; Jenny, who had transformed from bully to devoted friend; Brad, who had learned to respect differences; and all the members of the Cultural Bridge Club. Principal Stevens introduced her with pride. "Our valedictorian has not only achieved the highest academic honors, but has also changed the very culture of our school. Please welcome Amira Hassan." As Amira approached the podium, the audience erupted in applause. She touched her new pendant for courage and began to speak. "4 years ago, I walked into Riverside High feeling like an outsider," she started. "My hijab made me different, and different wasn't always welcome. But today, I stand here not despite being different, but because I learned that our differences make us stronger." She paused, looking at her classmates. "In biology, we learned that the strongest ecosystems are the most diverse. The same is true for our community. Every one of us has a unique story, a different perspective, a special contribution to make." Amira spoke about the transformation she had witnessed, how bullying had turned into friendship, how fear had become understanding, and how small acts of kindness had created lasting change. "To the freshman who feels different," she continued, "your differences are your strength. To the student who feels afraid to speak up, your voice matters. And to those who once saw differences as a threat, thank you for showing that people can change." She then addressed the future. "As we leave Riverside High, we carry more than just our diplomas. We carry the knowledge that real education isn't just about grades or awards. It's about growing as human beings, about learning to understand each other, about using our knowledge to make the world better." Looking at her parents in the audience, Amira's voice filled with emotion. "My father always told me to keep my head high. Today, we all hold our heads high, not in pride, but in gratitude for the lessons we've learned from each other." As she concluded her speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. The applause was thunderous. Even some of the teachers were wiping away tears. After the ceremony, as families and friends celebrated, Dr. Chen from Stanford made a surprise appearance. "I came to personally welcome our future scientist," she said, hugging Amira. "Your story has already inspired so many." The Hassan family celebration that evening was filled with joy and hope. The Cultural Bridge Club members stopped by to present Amira with a special gift, a book filled with letters from students whose lives she had touched. Later that night, as the celebrations wound down, Amira sat in her room looking at her graduation photos. There was one of her with her family, another with her friends, and a group photo with the science club. Each picture told part of her story. She opened her laptop to finish one last task, an email to next year's freshman class, sharing advice and encouragement for their journey ahead. As she typed, she smiled, knowing that the changes she helped create would continue long after she left. On her desk lay her Stanford acceptance letter, her valedictorian medal, and her state science trophy. But more valuable than these achievements was the knowledge that she had helped transform Riverside High into a place where future students would feel welcomed, regardless of their differences. As she finished her email, Amira looked out her window at the stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at Stanford, but she was ready. She had learned that the greatest achievements come not from being the best, but from helping others find their best selves too.